hit the button on the right that looks like a person with a voice. Your microphone will turn green like this, and then
Got it.
yep, and then we just turn it off.
Okay, I think we're all here, so we'll call the meeting to order and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Will you please call the roll? Yes.
Here.
Number 4 on the agenda was review and approval of minutes, and those will be presented in the next meeting. Next item is open forum. Do we have anybody signed up? No one signed up for open forum. So we move on to item number 6, which is new business, parking facility financing.
So, try to break this down into different pieces, and I wanted to start with a very broad, just overview price-wise. That was based on a cost estimate I received on February 12th, which was 5989286. We made some modifications to the ground level entry point to be at the bottom. I don't know that that actually impacted the overall cost. I will say that the $800,000 cost estimate for earth removal by all accounts from every single person I've spoke to is just astronomically high, especially since there's a value. But I think we can just look at that number as an added contingency item. Speaking to multiple people over, because there was a high number for that on the more preliminary cost estimate I was using for grant money, but not that that's a bad thing, but I find that difficult to understand, but I'll just put that in there. So from the 5989, we have received $900,000 from the state capital budget. Take 18,000 of that away. I show that as that number is because after the state capital budget funding is allotted based upon the kind of project it is and who the city tied to. When we did this application, we tied ours to parks because you have to tie it to something. We tied it to supporting the Little Miami Bike Trail. Little Miami Bike Trail is owned by ODNR, so ODNR will administer it and they take a cut, $18,000. And then because Claremont County sits in the Appalachian region, the ARC, we applied for and we've received $250,000 from the Appalachian Region Commission. We should be getting a grant agreement on that relatively soon. From that, I tried to touch on some of the aspects that we're talking about, which is how does this help our financial health indicators? What does this do in terms of other known projects? There was some question regarding Moody's. It would totally be a fictitious number. You cannot get how any loan will impact your Moody's rating until you do a Moody's call, and you're not going to get it. So I didn't even go down that road because it would not be a realistic number. We're a AA2. I'm not even going to say it, but I would have no reason to believe that additional debt based on current reserves that we're going to impact that. But I did not go for the whole Moody's call rating. So Mark will touch on some of the reserve money, because reserve money factors into some of the amortization tables in the various scenarios that we attached that were run and attached to the application, attached to the memo, because I sort of saw it as I sort of looked at as three different instances with three different lending periods. So 20 years, which meets our debt requirement, 25 years and 30 years. And we did discuss that at a previous meeting. And from there, I looked at it from three different ways. Full funding, less grants, plus roughly $1 million back to the city after land purchases are factored in and by the time all the engineering design is complete. I don't know right now, based on looking at the budget, that number is about 800,000 as we speak, if you factor in everything. And then I looked at it, that's scenario 1, 2, and 3, 20, 25, 30. Scenario 4, 5, and 6 is fund the facility, less the grants, and do not reimburse back to the general fund those monies, 20, 25, 30. And the final is finance the parking facility, less the grants, no reimbursement back to the city, and $1 million in fund balance towards the project, 20, 25, 30. So that's about every picture I can imagine giving you in terms of amortization tables. There's some question on there, and I still can't fully understand, but I believe it's just trying to factor in fees, why we know our rate will be 2.5, but all the amortization tables from Payne Weber are at 3. And I forwarded, Greg Alsbach brought that up, and I forwarded you all an email from Andy Brossard, who gets all of our finances together. And that was the best explanation I can have. Once we get a little closer, especially if you have additional information that you want before we go to council, I was thinking I'd bring Andy in, but this meeting was canceled. Then I realized I needed to actually put it back on because some other things have changed. So those are the various scenarios for you to look at, and of course they're in the agenda for the public to look at. The only real known project that I can tackle right now is the Public Works financing. Ironically, March 4th, we opened up the bids on that. Our low bid was 1.2, which is a good bid for the building. Sticking with a straight up 20-year amortization for the project, I included how that would play out. I just gave you a little bit of history about the Public Works building. It's built in 1976. I mean, in a nutshell, it's falling apart at the seams. It should have been replaced. I should have replaced it. Should have jumped on it years ago. But with that in mind, I think it's important to state that a building like that, just like how we pay various employees, is based upon what their role is, how much of the work you're doing for the general fund, how much work, so on and so forth. That's the same way with how the debt on the Public Works building would get paid back. Talking to Cindians, well, I know for a fact that the building functions: Parks and Leisure, street maintenance, water cap, sanitation and environment, stormwater, and sewer billing. These are all functions of who work, either employees that work there, storage equipment that's a storage there, or basically operations. Based on that, in a very generic sense, and we would do this in more detail, and talking to Scott and Cindy, I broke down the percentages of park for each of those counts. 2020, 2010, 2010. Then I took the $65,000 on the debt service for the Public Works building, and I just broke it down based on that same percentage and how they would each contribute towards it, 13,000 or 6,500 to equal the percentage of the total. Of those 6 funds, 1 is general fund, which is Parks and Leisure. 4 are enterprise funds: water cap, sanitation, stormwater, and sewer billing. And street maintenance is funded through gas tax and motor vehicle registration fees. Though it has gotten some funding for transfer balance from the general fund. I do want to point out just sort of the end of year balances on those funds, and I will note from water cap, which could also be water op, but it would be water cap, but it's basically percentages of every dollar that comes in. The water fund is witnessing significant increases in revenues thanks to the city modifying the rate structure and the minimum billing. In the first quarter of 2021, as opposed to the first quarter in 2020, we billed 172,000 gallons less this quarter than we did same time last quarter, and we made $76,000 more. Not a single user, not a single household paid more than $7. So we would anticipate that our projections and the models that were ran on that water breakdown will be true, if not exceed it. So we are getting in a position where the water fund will begin to build up a water capital, and would certainly be able to handle its share of the public works building, even if that comes up a little bit more, based on a more deeper dive into who does what and so on and so forth. Then I looked into the financial health indicators. We got a tremendous amount of help from Mike Coangelo, and we sort of focused on number 12. And John and I had a discussion this afternoon, and I'm going to run was it 16 or 19 that you thought 16 lever ratio. We can discuss that in a bit. So what we did there was I just ran some scenarios, just sticking with 20 years. Going back a little bit, real quick, I just want to touch on, even though our debt policy is 20 years, there have been multiple examples where we've exceeded the 20 years. And then I ran the financial health indicators for all three scenarios I said before, but just on 20 years, just straight up 20 years, because I figure that's the worst case scenario. If you spread it out, financial health indicators are going to conversely go down. And those are interesting to look at, because with 12% being the cautionary and the balloon payment that we have due in 2026, we do not get to the 12% cautionary at all, even with a extremely large balloon payment, the payment we have in 2026 on the downtown TIF. So that's pretty significant. And remember, that was at 20 years. So I did not go do a deep dive into the Fire Station 63. I don't know what the cost in the fire station would be. They have a significant amount of debt. They have a big chunk of debt rolling off in 2022. And if and when they build a new fire station, when that does happen, the Fire Station 63, those proceeds would likely go to pay off additional debt or just be a lump towards the building. I did not do a deep dive in that. What has happened since we've spoke was, or once I originally worked on this memo, is really condensed into that final paragraph. Additional funding considerations. A couple things have happened. The city is following the CARES COVID-19 Relief Act funding. We will be getting $2,580,000, half increments relatively soon. Soon being its government, I don't know, April, May. That's $1,290,000. That needs to be considered, because obviously that half, the first half we get now and the second half we get later, if all would be well, the parking facility would be well under construction. Another interesting point is, as I remember, I submitted a grant application over the summer for $2,831,850 to the Economic Development Administration. That grant was not approved. I received a call from the Economic Development Administration Chicago district head. We're within the Chicago district, and was told that that particular fund that I submitted the application will be getting $3 billion more in funding, and explained that I will be getting a notice of funding, which they call an NOI. And a couple things are different. Not only did they look over our application, explain to me a little more detail as far as we were going against some relatively large manufacturing, but one of the most important things they said, along with their desire to help me make the application stronger, is that this recent $3 billion that has been into the EDA funding, the exact fund that I submitted this application for, now has a tourism twist to it, which tourism, restaurants, that whole thing, which was my whole argument. which was all the letters. We got a letter from almost every single business in this downtown district. Retail, I mean, literally a stack of letters saying we will retain this or we will add this number. They want that on it. They want to keep the letters. Dave start using this form, but that is really helps us out considerably with this application, and we can apply up to 50% of the total project cost. I've been writing grants for 31 years. I've never said it's, but this certainly feels like this is a good opportunity for us to bring in. If you just take 50% of the project cost potentially coming from EDA, you've already got 900,000. You've already got 250,000. If you decide that the 1,290,000 is coming in, which you could make an argument, even though it has no restrictions, have a shovel ready project that would have a direct impact on those that have been impacted by the pandemic. Because certainly I can fill this room with people who would tell me I should never build this parking garage, but I could also fill this room with business owners who will tell you, when are you going to build the darn parking garage? So if you would do that, I mean, we are looking at a potential to really have a significant amount of this project funded from outside funding sources, which is certainly what my job is and what staff's job is. So that in a nutshell is where I'm at right now. I'll be 100% honest. I'm moving along with the design, construction, structural engineering, all the kind of things that go. I shut it down during the pandemic. I mean, we just shut it completely down. A good 8 months, they didn't touch this project in any way, shape, or form. They didn't touch this project. Then I got them going again. We're back. I included in there what the design is. It shows you that ground floor entryway into the project. That was a direct request from the residents that live in this area that feel that it will really cut back on the traffic on First Street. I agree with them. I don't think it impacted the cost at all, and we didn't lose a single parking space. We're doing a traffic park study now that, though it's for the outside area, we would envision that we would be using either kiosk or Park Mobile, which is a mobile app, which will save us having to put any kind of gated parking in there. Those are sort of yesterday. Working on operational costs versus revenue cost. That's about a push, because in true operational costs, it's more than just paying the bill for the lights. Remember, we didn't put a restroom in this. It's also having money put away in a fund for the ongoing maintenance of it. Yes, sir. I'm finished. I was rambling. I'm finished. Yes, we're right at 1.2 on the Public Works garage. We're going to go up a little because the sprinkling was an option, but there is another cost that we'll deduct. We're obviously going to sprinkle the building. Yeah, we're going to be right around 1.2 on that. We got good bids. Remember, this is sort of a steel-built building, very similar to the Public Works garage when you drive by there. But the answer is yes.
1.2 plus, 4.8, there is shown on page 2, we'll run it down now 40, so we get a nice little six. So we get about $6 million for the projects.
Actually,
Go ahead.
Actually, I think it's another $1 million on the garage, because you got $1 million, you got 800 for the land, and another whatever 200 that you might spend in pre-construction. So the garage is really 7 million and not 6.
But less a million, because the givens are the 900 and the 250 are given. No matter
Correct.
what.
But I'm
You're
looking at
right.
total project.
Yes, that's the question. I sort of see it as, be honest with you, and just to be completely blunt, I see sort of three questions. Question one I see is, do we feel the need to pay back the general fund? I want to point out one very important comment that goes into the consideration, which is on packet page 7 and under on packet page 7. I'm sorry, wait a second. Just 1 second, because I want to make sure I cite the right place, because these are online and I don't want to cite the wrong area. And I don't know why I didn't bring this up, because to me this is a pivotal point in the questions that you would need to consider, which is right here. Oh, it's on. I'm sorry. It's under. Okay, I'm sorry. If you go to packet page 3, and if you go to the top paragraph, it starts on a separate agenda item. Dot 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 dot. And if you go to the last sentence in that particular paragraph, I wrote, even with current low interest rates, for every $1 million of funding not financed, the city will save $65,000 in annual debt service and approximately $300,000 in interest over a 20-year term. I think that's a pretty critical number to remember. And my question would be, you're looking at three questions that are all $1 million questions. Question number one is paying back the city monies that was expended in 2019 of roughly $1 million, earmarking the funding that's coming into the city with no restrictions, roughly $1 million, add two. And then the other question is whether or not, based upon what Mark has presented from our current reserves and our current cash flow and our current investments, whether or not we invest another million, because each one of those millions represents $65,000 in annual debt service saving and significant $300,000 in interest over the course of a 20-year term. So it's three $1 million questions, I guess, is the best way to summarize it, Greg.
It strikes me that
Yeah. Yes.
not
Yes.
the 5.4 million.
Let's see. So what we have in our investment portfolio, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so right now, everything that we have in Star, Ohio is getting about 9 basis points. So not getting very much there. And we also have some funds with Raymond James that is in a money market account, about 1 basis point. So not making very much off of that sitting around.
The amortization, yes. I'm not 100% sure because if you take the total, if you would take the if you would take the 900,000, the 250,000, and the 1,290,000 that's coming to the city, that would be $2,440,000. And if you said we were going to go ahead and move forward, and then I come in and say, oh, we got $2.83 million. I don't. The question would be, do they anticipate that going to construction costs? I would say they wouldn't expect that to going towards construction costs more than they would anticipate that paying off the debt on the project. So I'll be honest with you, I won't be submitting this application till May. I'm working on it now, going through the different components of it. But if we even got close to that number, that alone would total $5,240,000 on the project, and that's not even putting in any of our fund balance towards the project either. And
I go through that same thing, Greg. I think you run into prepayment issues. I think Andy would be the person to talk to about prepayment. But generally, when they're buying a debenture like this, there's a given amount of yield guaranteed for a certain portion, and there's a window where you can't prepay. I'm not saying that's the case with this one because I don't know for sure, but the way I see this, it's possible we could have $5 million, in essence, free money towards a $7 million project. And how can you plan with that much uncertainty? I just don't know. And
No,
in,
no, exactly, yeah.
so in the end, when you're looking at the 10-year treasuries going up, you know, certainly if the 10-year treasury is going up, you're going to see the shorter term treasuries go up too. So, you know, our yield on our deposits are going to go up. At the same time, our costs are going to go up for borrowing. They may not be in the same increment, but there's some offset there. I struggle with your job, Dave. $5 million in equity on a $7 million project coming out of thin air is like pulling a rabbit out of a hat, and it's just phenomenal. So I think you have to plan for the worst and prepare for the best. Really, I think from the financial indicators that you've put together, it looks like from a debt service standpoint, it's not going to have a huge effect on us as far as our financial health indicators. So we could float as much of this as we decide we want to.
If I could chime in there, John.
Sure.
The only comment I want to make is there's also debt policy limitations that were established by City Council like in 1997. We are running up against those limitations. And as a matter of fact, we're exceeding those limitations based on those three scenarios that Dave presented. So I just want you to be aware of that, even though we're not exceeding the state financial health indicator.
Is it the 20-year term Is that the issue, or is it?
It's actually all three of them. It's the amount of debt that he's proposing to carry in those first three scenarios. It just exceeds the debt policy limits.
The aggregate, is it aggregate debt?
Yes. Aggregate debt as well as, or the debt, you're talking about the debt outstanding?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Total
yeah,
city
it's,
debt.
It's the debt outstanding, which is limited to 3% of, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, 3% of some standard figure. And then the other one is, the other limitation is 10% of, I don't know why those aren't readily available to me, but,
Well, that's something, Mike, we'll need to,
yeah.
we'll need to look at.
What was that
I just wanted to comment that we are running up against some limitations that were established by city council years ago.
I believe it had something to do with total valuation of the city.
Yes, that's correct.
Can I throw something out here, and this is totally wrong, just shoot me down, it's okay. That's question, the other question is it possible to take some of the fund balances, and I would say street maintenance, stormwater, sewer billing, and use some of that cash up front to reduce the debt?
I'm sorry, that was just literally based upon Cindy, Scott, and I sitting with a spreadsheet and going over how the
Okay, I'm just curious. where it
Yeah.
came from.
How does the
Some
pub?
relationship to the budget allocation.
Yeah,
But your question is, can we take some of the cash and use some of that cash up front?
we can do pretty much anything that you guys want. It's
I'm worried about the debt load.
yes, I understand. Enterprise.
Street main, well, if you're doing 13,000 a year, that's 260 over 20. There's three funds that are currently over 260. And those are the three that I selected, saying, okay, there's enough cash in there. And I'm assuming these things build up, obviously over time. So we wouldn't be strapped for cash in those three funds, which is another way to look at it.
You're right, because I think we righted the water ship, and we've righted that ship. I would tell you, obviously, we wouldn't want to touch it, but I think we've righted that ship. You're correct. The street maintenance fund is that end of year balance was based upon a year when the gas tax was considerably low. We would anticipate the gas tax in 2021 being significantly higher, as it's already beginning to start to peak back up as people are going back to work. So yes, there's a lot of ways we can massage this. I would say they're both such important projects in their own way. One from a city operations, city services benefit, and one from a downtown. And again, I think it gets lost all the time is the economic development tool that the parking garage is. I see it as a clear economic development tool. 5 years from now, how will you ever actually measure it in terms of in potentially increased taxes, increased investments into the downtown TIF, and increased income tax that we receive from that project? It's a little hard to ever put a dollar amount on that, but that gets lost in it a little bit. But yeah, it's funny because they're just two completely different projects in their own way, but both so equally important. I'm embarrassed. I was embarrassed to put those pictures in there, that I allowed those people to be working in an operation like that. But I'm trying to right that wrong here. So yeah, sorry.
No, that's all right. So corollary to Mike's question, do we have separate reserve requirements on any of those funds that, for the garage? So as you break down the sanitation, stormwater, street maintenance, park leisure, do those have different, well, park leisure's coming out of general, but are there different reserve requirements that we need to also be aware of?
I guess I could jump in for enterprise funds. Kind of the rule of thumb that I've always gone by is maintaining about 20% or closer to 25% of reserves. They seem to be doing a lot better, but they're kind of close to that, and they certainly have to be restricted to their own purposes. So I don't think they would be able to go to the garage or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I just was making sure we didn't have a policy
Right, and
Yeah.
for covenants and,
that put a dollar amount or a percentage amount on each of those funds for a separate reserve. I'm looking by policy, is all I'm trying to confirm.
Okay.
I don't believe we do, but I can do a quick look tomorrow and go back through all of our debt policies that we have. I do, in all transparency, when you look at that sewer billing fund, we will be expending money out of that sewer billing fund for an expansion of the sewer main up State Route 48 to accommodate the Butterworth housing development, the Homerama development, and that. But we actually will be adding new customers in that. But that's a separate item.
I mean, I just think there's some money there that we might be able to tap into to reduce that 1.2. And then my other question, I have several questions actually on the whole meeting. You know, I'm concerned about the cost. We get so many cost overruns on the safety center. What guarantees do we have that the parking garage and the public work aren't going to fall into that mess?
I don't have any. I think both. So from a construction cost on the parking facility, I'm trying to look at what could potentially be an overrun. It would be a soil issue, maybe a foundation.
Average for a parking garage, $25,000 a square foot, and they're quoting about $25,000 per car, and they're quoting almost 22,000 a car. So I thought if they're close to the national average, that's another $1 million on the cost of the garage. That's one of my concerns is the risk there.
I understand.
The other thing that the national average for the number of square feet for a parking garage is $65, which is exactly what they've given us. So I got concerned when I saw the per car because it's way under the national average.
Yeah, I did not. I knew about the one. I did not know the national average cost per car. I of course always harken back to that $812,755 for something that when I got here in 2014 I was paying top dollar for, dirt to fill the area at Loveland Station. But that is what it is. I reached recently.
I think it's, I don't know if I necessarily have to answer it now, but
Right.
would recommend a key follow-up in terms of, I mean, if there's contract mechanisms or just project management mechanisms that, we can put in place that would be different from the safety center that would help mitigate that risk. So I don't know exactly, what, was, how the RFP read, but just, if it's, I'm sure it's, fixed bid, so that, any sort of, that limits the exposure to the city.
Huge. It's huge exposure.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. No, that's good data. I mean,
I think in any new construction project, you're going to have risk of cost overruns. You can also have the same risk for cost savings. So, I think that's an imputed risk whenever you have a development. So I don't know if we do fixed price type contracts, whether this would be something that could be done that way. But certainly I think when you enter into a project this size, you gotta have a contingency that's 10%. And you gotta be able to deal with that.
I'm sorry, go ahead and finish.
That's what I had to say. I'm done. Mike?
Yeah, we get a grant for 2.5 million, suddenly the cost of the project is gonna jump up. It'll be public record. I'm just looking for some ways we can lock in. There's a 5% contingency on the construction within the bid, which, that might be average or whatever.
I'll tell you, it is that's on the low side. I mean, I agree that would break out at 10%.
So, I just think we need some protection on the construction, so the thing doesn't get run away again.
And I think, as we think, that would be an action coming out of today, but, in particular, as we think about, for evaluating, debt financing that, is comfortable, or I'll call it, and comfortable would be defined as, hey, we stay within the health indicators. If you had a $2 million cost overrun that you then had to pay, and then refinance it, then it would put you above. So I do think it's a good point, and we need to do as much as possible to mitigate that risk. But in terms of what are some of the other information, and is it those three, I'll call it statutory limits, but the limits there that council voted on back in '97 in terms of the amount of debt. Do we need to get those specifics and basically have a quantification around how far off, or basically how much can be borrowed under those current limits?
I think.
And back to just how do we come to what is the incremental data that we would need to come to a recommendation on, hey, do we go float 7 million? Do we go do something different?
I can certainly. I was working with Mike Quangelo on the debt, on how it impacts the policies. When I rescheduled it, I sort of finished this up real quick. I can easily put together, because Mike got me started on each of the debt policy under a myriad of scenarios. And I can also tap into the other financial health indicators. I can reach out to EDA, but I'd rather not, as far as, hey, if we start before we apply, before we know about funding, can we use money from you to pay off our debt? Because I don't think the answer is going to be yes. And I don't want to, because I'm talking to the people who actually reviewed my first application. But I do think, my personal opinion is, it's easy it would be easier to look at this if there was some direction regarded, at least on that first half payment we're getting on the known given. We have two knowns, which is the 900 and 250. We have pretty much another known, because at some point Mark's going to be getting a check for $1,290,000 with no restrictions, as opposed to what Tom had to deal with through all of 2020. There's no restrictions based on what Joe, our city attorney, is telling us. I would certainly anticipate that those funds, we would be doing a service to the entire city, not just the downtown district, because we would be making a savings on our debt service, on our annual debt service, and we would be making a savings on overall interest, and we thus saves the whole community. And of course, we would be improving the funding source for the parking facility, knowing that there's another $1,290,000 coming in later, probably in all due respect, probably likely while this project is either well under construction or near its beginning. I don't know the exact date because I don't know what the first date is, and then from that point on. But to me, I cannot imagine putting that funding towards more walk-in lighting, more restroom where drinking type things. In my opinion, we've done that. We invested those monies back into those kind of items that have long-term impact on sanitation. And I don't know how many communities would have a shovel-ready project as we do that we could put the money towards and say, we're actually using this funding to help those impacted by the pandemic. And they have been. I think this city council should be commended for what they did right off the bat with what they did with the DORA, and what they did with the carry-out parking spaces. I mean, you have a conversation with some of the business owners and see how thankful they are what the city did. And so those are important parts to me. And if we, as a group, feel that that's a recommendation and we want to proceed with that first half, this is also a community that's currently doing a grant program in the Loveland Heights, where we're matching people in the Loveland Heights to make improvements to their exterior improvements to the house. Just got an application today. The letters just went out. So, I mean, all the scenarios, the funding scenarios can change. And I wouldn't feel comfortable taking that same $1.2 million, $1,2,900,000 and saying, well, we're just going to use that to build the parking facility, because I think it's completely different when it's projects that are enterprise funding. To me, those are enterprise funds. That's the price of doing business, is why you pay your water bill and you pay your sanitation and your stormwater, and those funds would go to a building that's long been due of over replacing. So I can run very easily all of these numbers, including the other health indicator that we had, but it would seem to me I would want to run those with a recommendation that the 1.29 goes towards it, even if you want to pay back the general fund, whatever that is, on the purchase of the properties in 19. But well, I mean, if that money comes in here today, I'm not gonna. I mean,
I'm still a little confused on it. Are we financing $7 million? Is that where we're at right now?
we put the $7 million as the number, is not the financing. We put it as the total cost for the parking garage.
We're financing $6 million? Like 6.1, is that where we're at?
We haven't decided. The total project is 7 million.
That's
Okay.
what,
All right.
So that's a garage.
2.6, you take $1 million out of general fund, you take 400,000 out of some of these other funds here. We're looking at about a $2 million note.
So this is the way
Am I missing something?
yeah,
I'm looking right at the bottom line
I think
here, yeah.
I think there's too much uncertainty for all these funds right now for us to be in a position to make a final recommendation. The way I see it is you got a $7 million project, you got $1,132,000 in grants, and you got $1,290,000 that's coming in as part of this COVID contribution for the city. So we don't have that yet. So I guess from my perspective, you only want to count on what you have in your hand and what's been approved. So I think the best way to proceed is going to be with Dave's review of the city's debt limits, with looking at the other financial indicator, which was essentially a leverage ratio, which I think is going to help us, making sure that it sounds like we're not going to have a problem with the other financial indicator, which is cash flow.
Cash flow from the standpoint.
Excuse me, cash flow from the standpoint of a $1 million contribution that would come out of operating funds? Is that
Yes.
is that what you're saying? Yeah, that should not be an issue based
Yeah.
upon the history of the way we've been using cash over the last 3 years.
So if we go in with a recommendation with the amount to be financed not to exceed, and ensure that we're within the ratios on the financial health indicators, and be in a position to be flexible once we've got I'm gonna say the peak financing approved, then if more money materializes either in the grant that Dave is resubmitting, and, you know, I'm not sure, but council might have other plans for some of this money that's COVID related. So I don't know that all this can be pigeonholed, but at least we could give council guidance that the city can float this amount of debt, and we're within our liquidity requirements to meet operating needs and to meet the financial health indicators. So we can either float all this in debt, or we can use these excess funds to go into the garage and not make the decision at this point, because there's no decisions, I guess, on the additional grant money. And when's the next $1,290,000 coming?
Though the first half of the 1,290,000, I would anticipate will be in the city hall. I would anticipate sometime in April. And all indications from what we've done for some basic research is it has absolutely no restrictions on it whatsoever. Tom can tell you what restrictions he dealt with the money we received.
So what's the second portion of that? What is the timing on it?
It's X number of months from when you get it. I'll find that out. I don't want to say and be wrong, because then someone will scream at me tomorrow.
Yeah.
But it's X number of months. They are breaking it up for a reason. Everyone's just finding out about the numbers. But I do anticipate the first 1,290,000 will be here sometime in April. And what we're hearing is no restrictions whatsoever.
And if I might, one of the things that I'm also looking for out of the recommendation to council is to make sure that members of council don't start deciding to start double booking some of these dollars to some project, right? So a recommendation to say, look, you know, use this first half towards bringing the debt down, right? Use the second half to make sure that we have the contingency funds, or however we think is the right recommendation based on the dollars we're buying down the debt on the back end, right? What are those recommendations to make sure that they don't get allocated for, you know, more than one purpose and using the same dollar bill twice for something?
That only happened in my company.
That's what happens when you get older, buddy.
So-
Getting things, right?
So what is, from a timing standpoint, what is the pressing need here?
Can I jump in for just a second, John?
Okay.
Before we get to that. One of the things, I want to go back to Greg's question about the how we're bumping up against the debt policy limits that were established by council years ago. I want to clarify what that specifies. And what it says is, looking at the general obligation debt associated with governmental activities, that is what you compare to other statistics to see whether or not you exceed the limits. What concerns me about this bond proposal that we've been talking about is we're mixing some business type activity funding with governmental activity funding. Although you go back to the proportions that Dave had outlined for what the 6 funds that would contribute to paying the debt service. 4 of those funds are for business type activities, but 2 of them, the parks and leisure and street maintenance, are governmental. So it's 40% governmental and 60% business type activities. So I don't know how you can combine that with the funding for the garage, the parking garage, which is governmental activities. So, Rob, do you see what I'm saying?
I do. I guess my question though, Mike, is how we finance it, right, versus the bookkeeping on the debt policy. Is that the right question to ask? Is that what you're trying to get to?
Well, it's not only that, but it's also from an accounting standpoint within CAFR. There's a distinction between the general obligation bonds, whether they're dedicated to governmental activities or whether they're dedicated to funding business type activities. And they're separate. And I have not seen any example where we've combined in a bond issue funding for both business type and governmental activities. They seem to be listed separately.
I understand what you're saying, and I just didn't realize that there would be a requirement on a municipality like Buffalo to split our bonds or limit our bond to one type of project or another. Because I thought in the past we've been able to combine, but I don't know if it's been this stark of a contrast.
Well, all I'm saying is it's going to make the calculation for the city imposed debt limits to be difficult to calculate, because you've got, it's supposed to be just general obligation bonds that you're looking at for for governmental activities, whereas you've got 60% of the piece for the building, the public works building is business. It's just, I think that's an issue. I think the auditor could straighten that out. I mean, we're in a position now, we're already talking to the auditor about the unaudited statements that will be presented to the state, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I think that would be a question that they could answer pretty quickly.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, we need that answer either from the auditor or from bond counsel to make sure.
Right. But it is not uncommon to lump various purpose items together into a debt issue. It's a reporting issue, but that's just something that we would have to take care of.
I guess at this point, it would be good to know sort of your marching orders, and I mean marching orders in terms of additional information for the next meeting, which would be on this topic. I think first and foremost, it certainly behooves us to have Andy Brossard in the audience. I think that behooves the city. I think we will look at the other indicator. I'll do a deeper dive with Mike on the debt policies on all the different scenarios. It's certainly my recommendation that first 1.29 that's coming in be earmarked for the parking facility. I just think it's the right use of it. And then it's a question is whether or not you feel that another $1 million from fund balance is an option. And then the other question is whether, and again, you need more information to make the decision on whether or not we follow through with the reimbursement process. And then to go back on what Mike Veroni said is, if I ran a spreadsheet and showed you based on those end of year balances on each of those funds, what percentage, for example, we could potentially use towards the public works building, knowing what the cost for the sewer project will take out of sewer billing. But after the sewer project's taken out of the sewer billing, I can't imagine and fathom that balance will sit there in perpetuity, because there's on that fund. So, and we can garner what we anticipate the current end of year balance are on all of those 6 supporting funds of public works building and bring more information to you. But the one thing that I feel, I don't think you have the information to commit fund balance yet towards the overall project on the parking garage. And I don't think you have the information yet to make a determination on whether or not we finance funding to give back the general fund money towards the upfront costs that happened in 2019. But what I do think is we do have enough balance. We do have enough information that we feel there a recommendation, or we feel that that first 1.29 should be earmarked towards the overall project. To me, I would feel very uncomfortable. We're not going to put it towards roads. We're at a $1,049,750. That's 4 times what we did when I first got here in 2014. That's a significant. What we're doing with the roads is we're building that up to get back to 750,000. We're doing catch up until we get back to what a city of our size with our road miles should be, which is 745,000, blah, 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 what Cindy talks. I don't know the exact amount, but it's right around 750. So this 1.49 is, we're just trying to catch up and then gear back to 750 and make that the standard number. I just feel like it coming with no restrictions doesn't mean that it can't be used towards something that ultimately does benefit those impacted. I'm
A couple other follow-ups, Dave, for our next meeting. I think we would want to understand or explore some of that risk mitigation options in terms of, or maybe it's, how is that construction contract going to be written? And then how would the risk be managed? And then the one question I would have, to everybody here is, are we in agreement that we would want to increase that, we'll call it that contingency amount that we would go ahead and consider, we'll call it covering, from a budget point of view? Going from 5 to 10%?
Yeah, I think internally that'd be a good idea.
Right. The question is, where do you put that? Do you use that out of hold your cash aside, or do you put that in some of your bonding?
Yeah, and I think, in that, that's just it's an added number that, as we do that analysis,
Yep.
where do we have that? So,
Right.
and that's a good point. You could say that, hey, you're going to basically, how much of your contingency do you fund outright, and how much, would you say that you pull out of your reserves?
I will add one thing from a construction cost standpoint. I've been talking to the Desmond, it's our engineer and design firm for the project, and I've been pushing or floating the idea that I feel that the earthwork, the civil work, would be bid separately. I think that number to me is so ridiculously skewed, and has been since we began this project. I think there's a real benefit to that being bid separately, because as opposed to an add-on as to a sub to an override contractor. I think if you reach out to someone who does the civil work for this project, the earth civil work, I'm not talking all the pipe and all the under work. Again, there's not much of that. We have no utilities. There's massive savings by not putting a restroom in that building. I think there's a real benefit to it, to bidding that out. $800,011. I look at that outside my window every day, and I just say, I don't see it. So
Is a lot of that transportation costs though, Dave?
I don't know. We're just started really going back and forth over the last couple of days. I just feel that's such a, and I think we can certainly
You might be able to drop that. That's what I'm saying. If you got a location very nearby that you want to put that material, you may cut down your transportation portion of that earthwork.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Rob, because dirt has value, and it just simply dirt has value, and that. Remember when I first got here, what were we doing across the street? We purposely, when we repaved downtown last year, we purposely did not pave Harrison and Carl Brown because we knew trucks would be moving and going. That's why we didn't pave those streets. But I would love to dump them in Chestnut, but there's 2 issues with that. I'm not going to do that to the residents of Main Street. And I can't just start dumping dirt in there because we have environmental issues.
Right. Understood.
Yeah.
And just one other question on the cost estimate. If the cost of material basis was used in here as more than a quarter old, I would recommend that you would go back to the Desmond and have them updated. Just, I mean, from own personal anecdotes on sizable projects, the cost of materials has gone up by like significantly, I mean, 25–30% in the past quarter.
Yeah, it looks like this was prepared February 12th.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I mean, and
it's a good idea just to get an update.
yeah, so that's when they sent it, and then if they were using data from O&D, then yeah, I mean, there's potentially some additional risk there, so. So just a question if you could have them verify that, please.
John, I just want to ask one more question related to that the bond funding that actually covers governmental activities as well as business type activities. I think one of the things that's been proposed already is refinancing of a 2013 water tower bond, which is one for business type activities. Could the funding for the parks and leisure and street maintenance, could the funding necessary for that be rolled into the refunding of that water tower?
The memo I gave you regarding the refinancing, I have to harken back in my memory. It was a total savings of $743,000. It was the water, Union Cemetery Road water tower, and it was also the downtown, the 2012 bond project, which includes this HVAC on this building. Was all, you were right, it's all lumped in there.
And actually, I said it backwards. I mentioned the two funds that are governmental funds. What I meant is the four funds that are funding the business type activities. Could those be rolled into that refinancing?
That's a good question, and it's probably why if I was better prepared, I'd have Andy sitting here, because he certainly knows those things, and if I guess, I'll be wrong. But that is a significant savings. If I do recall, that to the water fund alone is a $32,000 savings. Look what the water fund's contribution to this project is, to the Public Works building is. That is even more. It's 3 times what it is, what we'll save in refinancing that direct relation to the water fund's contribution towards the project. So that's, and then I know you're just moving money around, but it's a significant savings to a fund that's just now coming out of a hole.
Yeah, and the only point I'm trying to make is I think in the long run it would be cleaner to separate the bond funding, strictly by whether or not the purpose of the bond is to support governmental activities or whether it's to support business type activities. I think there's some advantages of that from an accounting standpoint, purely accounting.
Now, I think there's transaction costs when you add another debenture. So the cost of floating it versus the counting has to be weighed, I guess. And Andy would be the person to talk about that too. Are there any more questions about the garage in the building? We haven't talked. Yeah,
Just a
Mike?
quick comment, John.
Yeah.
We have 2 distinct projects here. We have one that's for the public and one that's for the city. And, I think it's important to keep that in mind as we march through this process, because the financing could be quite different for both of them in terms of using those reserve funds with all those other sewer things, using that money since it's already on hand, versus something that's for the public seems to be easier to finance. And there's going to be revenue coming out of that parking garage, and I know hopefully we're hoping that it's going to cover the annual maintenance cost. And I don't know, Dave, I know in your notes here that we're not quite sure what that looks like yet, but that's the other factor that we really haven't touched on, is how do we maintain the garage over a number of years after we build it?
That's a good question, Mike. Rough numbers I have so far, minimum revenue was $94,000. Operation costs, which is electric, an employee picking up the garbage in the garbage cans and putting away money in a fund for its perpetual care, was $92,000, ironically. Again, there's some numbers in there that would be modified if, with other elements, but because it's such a basic structure, the one does just on early numbers, on what I consider minimum revenue and maximum operating cost, it's almost a push.
And I'm assuming the revenue is just parking fees, no advertising. Like, what if we put a Tide dry cleaner in there, like some of the other garages? Sorry, Greg.
It's
So,
just,
I know you have it down in Washington Park, there's a Tide dry cleaner in the parking garage where people have a locker, right? You put your stuff in and,
I know who you can call.
all right, let's forget that. Anyways. I
Okay.
think there's other avenues for revenue, that's it.
So you gave a pretty good synopsis as far as I had on my notes, David, for the next meeting that we have. Having Andy in the audience, talking about our debt limitations that the city has, adding the additional financial health indicator, what Greg talked about on the bid. Maybe dividing that up into 2 separate bids, that sounds like a good idea. I'd like to get understanding of the second payment once that's clarified. And then I think the strategy for the next meeting should be one where I think we should be setting a cap on the amount of debt that we want the city to entertain. And anything below that would be acceptable. But I think rather than guess what our funding sources are going to be, we should be looking at the maximum and applying our tests and our rationales to the maximum amount so that we aren't running through so many scenarios and making it very complicated. I think this is going to be much simpler if we put a cap on the debt and we make that recommendation to City Council, and then we let the grants materialize, and we make a decision when the information is known.
I want to agree with Mike Veroni, because I'm a big proponent of what enterprise funds mean by their very nature. They're the cost of doing business. And I would be interested to look at the 4 enterprise funds associated with this project, try to calculate what we anticipate their end of year balance is likely to be, and figure out a percentage what those enterprise funds would contribute towards the public works building, because that is what that is all about, in my opinion. That's why it's the same as taking money to repair a water line and so on and so forth. So I really like the idea of, even though it'll ultimately be combined because of the savings for associated fees, I like the idea of, says what we anticipate the end of year balances are on the 4 enterprise funds, and figure out a legitimate contribution from those funds in cash, because that is what enterprise funds are all about. And I think that's a really legitimate way to look at that public works building. So I will work on that also, because I think that's a good point that Mike said, and it's cost of doing business.
Okay, so what I'd like to do then is,
When's the next meeting?
I want to, well, we haven't set that. I'd like to go to the next item on the agenda, which was cash flow and investments. We really haven't touched on this. And I'll turn it over to Mark, I guess.
All right, thank you. So there are two handouts, cash flows and investments, just to talk about, how things have been going, how much we have to cover expenses. If you look on the cash flow analysis, which I believe has been provided to the group in the past, it kind of looks at the last 2 years, and this is all for all funds. This is not just strictly for general funds. Looking at what is the kind of the doom and gloom situation that would happen if we had the highest expenses in 2 years and the lowest revenues in 2 years. How much of a cash drain would we need? Would we have? And if you see at the bottom, the what's called the worst scenario liquidity is about $1.75 million. If you look over to the far right column, the subtotal of operating accounts, and what that is talking about is what we have in LCNB Bank and our Fifth Third lockbox. Those are the two cash sources that are would be readily available. All of our checks come out of LCNB, but the money that we have in the Fifth Third lockbox from utilities and whatever other payments that we get from them, those are accessible within about a day or two to come over to LCNB. Everything else, our CDs that we have, Star Ohio and the portfolio with Raymond James, those are all funds that, while some of them are available quickly, those are at the discretion of the investment committee, and they would have to give the authority to move that money over. So with that, comparing the subtotal for operating accounts column with the worst scenario liquidity column, you can see that within the last 2 years, we've had a pretty good cushion on what we have there. So if there is a need for cash for any emergency or large scale projects, there is a little buffer with what we can use that for.
Does this mean if you take the 3.3 million and if you want to use the worst case, the 1.7, 1.8 million, that you could peel about $1.5 million out of operating and put it into Star?
Correct. If you took the subtotal operating accounts and took out, worst case scenario happens, you take that 1.75 out, whatever is left, yeah, that's what you have access to. So, and
Okay.
if I can move on to the next page, or if there's questions.
No, anybody have questions?
Okay. Moving on to the second page, talking about the investment portfolio. This is going to take into account any CDs that we have and anything that we would have with our Raymond James account and also with Star Ohio. You'll see, just because of the way the interest rates are, we don't have much tied up in long-term investments. 5.2 million is either available now or within a year's time. So, and again, most of that is in Star Ohio, has $4.5 million. That can be withdrawn pretty quickly with the recommendations of the investment committee.
Any questions on cash flow or investments? Okay, we'll move on. Do we have any old business to discuss? Communications? How about next meeting? Mike brought that up.
I think I will reach out to Andy and then work my way backwards from there and check on his availability. And then I'll work from there once I have the couple dates from him, and then I will circle back with the Finance Commission members and go from there. And then I need to go to council to get approval for, per the new policy, I have to go to council to get permission for Zoom attendance. So I have a few things I have to do to get everything in line.
We have, April 21st is already on the calendar. Would we think we want to get back together ahead of that?
I would say before that.
Yeah, there's an, I guess, Greg, as you brought up, when you start looking at what's happening with some of the rates, I think Mike said that it may not be that volatile, but I think as this dollar becomes available, there's a balance here, and the sooner we can make a determination, you brought up material costs and how things are changing. I think the sooner we can come to a conclusion, help council make a decision, the better.
And
So
Joe,
I would not want to wait that long, personally.
no, I agree. I think we want to act with as much urgency as we can here, because actually I was just looking at the slope on the 10-year, and it's pretty steep. So.
And just from a staff standpoint, it would be a lot easier if I won't be providing a dissertation. I will be providing just per your recommendation. Please find attachment A. It is the following. Because I gave you all the fluff with this memo. It'd be a lot easier if I can just get the information together and put it in a format without the whole long detailed memo. And then we sit here and we discuss it, because a lot of time goes into writing all of the narratives that go with them. We've done that. So you know what I'll be providing you. I will do my best to get, between Mark and I, get the package out to you well in advance, and we'll go from there. So I'll get on it. But I must say that I will not likely be able to have a date before next Tuesday's meeting. So what my thought is that I won't be able to, because of the rules, I won't be able to go to council until their April meeting to ask permission for the Zoom. So I'll do what I'm sorry.
Yeah, take a look at that, Dave, and make sure, because if we have our next meeting, even though the date may not be rigid, is the way we have the rules written require a rigid date, or is it just the fact that it's going to be our next meeting?
That's a good question.
So I'd ask for the flexibility, right? As we're scheduling this to go to the next meeting at council, ask for the Zoom meeting, right, with the TBD date. It's just we know it's coming.
That's a great idea, because I haven't put out the packet.
That's sufficient.
That's a great idea, because I'm not putting the packet out tomorrow. I'll throw in something under city manager's reports, basically just bluntly saying we had this meeting. There's another one coming prior to our April 21st regular meeting. It is TBD. Greg, would you see you being up there or down here? Because I have to list names. What do you think, Greg? You want me to just put you in as a safety net?
Probably, today was just a full day, and
Okay.
normally I would try to attend in person. So.
No problem. I'll just put Mike and Rob, and put you two. I'll put you back in here. It's just I have to be specific. So, and that's why Mike. That's Mike Veroni. That's why I was calling you that day when I kept missing you on the phone. That's what I was calling you about. Was that? So I'll get that TBD. It'll be on the agenda for next Tuesday.
That makes sense, Dave. That way it gives us the flexibility to not wait until April's council meeting to schedule ours.
Okay. Any other communications? Then I guess I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Oh, I think we have to call the roll on the motion. What do we do here?
Who was the second, by the way?
It was Rob.
Rob?
You. All right, Mr. Colangelo,
Yes.
Mr. Alsbach,
Yes.
Mr. Veroni,
Yes.
Mr. Weisgerber,
Yes.
Mr. Ross.
Yes.